Hey there, this is Troy Yamaguchi for Plus Two, and today we have our first week's installment of our Lawless Time weekly meta update. We'll describe the latest developments in the competitive premier meta, analyzing what's being played and why to help you prepare for your next big event. In these updates, as always, we'll talk about what events are upcoming, what has happened recently, and how this affects the decks we choose to play going forward. And as for what's happened recently, well, the set is still new. We just had our release weekend events this past weekend, with the most notable of these being the Spellbound London Invitational, which featured 24 selected players as well as 8 qualifiers. In terms of upcoming event, the big thing to look out for this weekend is the McClunky Cantina Clash 5K. This event should have a larger player pool, giving us a wider field of the competitive meta to discuss next week. And looking still further down the line, we have a couple weeks until PQs begin. The very first PQs start in about 2 weeks on the weekend of March 28th, but the American events, which comprise the bulk of our PQs and therefore the bulk of our information about the format, will be starting on April 4th. And these are what we're most looking forward to right now. Of course, the first major of the season is in about a month on April 18th, and this is the most important tournament to be thinking about right now. This is what all of our prep and all of our meta considerations are going to be looking towards, having the best deck for that event. So, in discussing latest event, we have just one bigger tournament to take a look at from this past week. I say big, but it was in fact very small. There were only about 32 players at this event, which is about the size of a locals or a store showdown. However, I think the quality of caliber of player invited to this event is likely to be higher than the small tournament size suggests. So this allows us to focus on what players that have been strong in the past are choosing to play in this metagame and what they're seeing, and deconstruct these choices through their deck lists. And speaking of which, this event was in fact won by the current reigning galactic champion, Benton from the Suit Racers, playing Tobias Red. We last week highlighted this strategy as a very powerful and potential new option in this meta during our meta update, though in that update I expressed my personal reservations in it ever reaching the pinnacle of competitive play, just on some of the issues that I had been seeing during my personal testing. Well, Benton has definitely shown that this deck is a very serious strategy. He had a very aggressive leaning deck, he was hitting base more than I was personally, and he had a very well-tuned deck list that I think has tooled itself to the needs of the format. So we're going to be taking a look at that right now. This is the Galactic Champions Tobias deck list, and I have like a running joke amongst our friends, and that's when the champion of your game shows you a list, it's incumbent on you just as a serious player to play the list, but also just to understand how they're approaching the format. We're going to discuss this archetype a little bit in more detail during the tier list portion, but there are a couple of things with the decisions here that I wanted to call out in particular. The first is the inclusion of these one-cost interaction cards. These cards are very efficient and suited towards racing. You don't see anything in the kind of expensive middle category of removal like a Beguile or a Tree Remembers in this deck list, and that's because this deck was being played very aggressively, pushing damage to the opponent's base rather than playing a mid-range or board trading strategy. You'll see that higher in the curve, there's actually some bigger removal though. You have one of Commandeer and the two of Lost and Forgotten as like kind of big removal spells. And this is very interesting because it means that during the first couple of turns of the game, he's attempting to get an advantage with his aggressive strategy and some of these low-cost interaction, but as the game enters its final turns, there are often times where you need to play a bigger piece of removal just to make sure that you, even as the aggressive strategy, don't die, and you can convert your board tempo advantage. So a lot of really great considerations here. Again, no Beguile, no the Tree Remembers, so that's something that's very notable to me about this list. Second here is these units that have both Raid and Restore. These units are pretty unique to Tobias's color combination, and they act as above rate units when played in a base hitting matchup. The Toydarian Technician in particular has been a card that has played way better than it looks for me in my personal testing. In the past, a 2-3 stat line was one of the worst things I thought you could be doing on 2, and this is because the 2-3 units get hit over for free by units with 3 power and 3 HP, which were the majority of turn 2 plays in the pre-rotation format. But now, because of the overwhelming prevalence of 2-4 stat lines on 2-cost units, this Toydarian guy gets to put in some work. He represents a bigger life swing than other 2-drops can provide in the race. He's very good against the space decks, which are not contesting you on the ground, so he ends up overperforming in this 2-drop spot. A very similar approach can go for Hona, the 4-cost Raid to Restore to Piggy. I just call this guy the piggy most of the time. This card looked really great all weekend. It was good not only in this deck, but we saw it played in the Vel red strategy. Essentially, when this card untaps between its raid and restore, it represents a 7 damage swing, which is honestly just an unacceptable amount of raw stats in any kind of fast matchups. And in addition to this, the answers to removing this card efficiently when it's played are pretty few and far between. They're limited to, I mean, like putting a Sentinel in front of this card is not the worst thing ever. The tricolored Kanan Jarrus is, I think, the best answer pound for pound, like on his turn. If you get to bounce this with that, you're incredibly happy with yourself. But if you don't have a good answer to this thing, just trying to remove the pig by combat is not a great option. It ends up soaking up 5 or more damage by itself and also puts more damage back on your units. So hitting this card isn't very good. Letting it untap is really bad, and the answers to just playing out what turns out to be the biggest stat stick you can find on curve at this time are rather limited. So this Hona card, in combination with a strategy that was already pressuring for answers early in the game, was looking really good all weekend. I was really impressed by it, and especially just because this Hona card in particular is the type of card that was not good in the pre-rotation format. This is the type of card I typically like to take out of decks, but it really did seem to pull its weight, and I'll be keeping an eye on it going forward. So those are the two main considerations with this deck list that I thought really tooled it well. I mean, there's a bunch of other things happening too, but those are the two things I wanted to highlight in particular. This is the rest of the top 8 from this weekend's tournament. Again, this was a very small tournament. They did play 8 rounds, which is a good amount of gameplay, but in terms of attendance and rounds played, this is about the length and rigor of a store showdown. So with this information, we're going to contextualize the results. I'm not going to fly off the handle and immediately say that this is what the meta should look like or anything like that. I'm not going to tell you to immediately go out and buy your Vel Red or your Admiral Akbar Data Vault cards, but I did watch this event, and based on what I saw and how I saw some of these leaders perform, I have had my opinion changed on a couple of decks for the time being. And so with all that being said, here is my current understanding of the metagame for this week 1. This is the format that our tier list will be presented in going forward. So to that end, we have the tier 1 decks arranged at the top here. These are the strategies that we're most afraid of during our preparation and testing. I think that these decks are all great picks to bring to a tournament. I think that they all have the ability to win. I think they're all serious considerations. So to lead off tier 1 here, I still have Boba and Luke pilots heading the pack. They didn't do anything this past weekend, but I still think it's way too early to call these decks into question. I still think that these two leaders are representative of the most popular space aggro strategies. I think that they will be seen play this year. Notably, in my week 0 guide, I guessed that these two in combination would see about 20 to 30% representation in the field, and this was the case even at something as small as a 32-person tournament. So with a larger McClunky 5K coming up this weekend, we'll see if these guys can hang on to the top spot as far as play rate goes, and if they're able to do this, if they're able to win. Something noticeable to me is that if JTL Vader shows up more, these two pilot leaders do get an additional boost to their metagame position, so that is a thumbs up for them. I mean, historically, Boba Pilot in particular has been just a diabolical matchup for Vader Pilot. That's just always how it's been for as long as these two decks existed. Other than that, I have in tier 1 here Tobias Red, Jin Red, Chewbacca, and Vader Pilot Yellow, also comprising in tier 1. As the metagame clarifies, I expect these decks to move around and kind of sort themselves as is appropriate, but as of right this moment, my very basic idea is that the various aggressive negotiations deck are the biggest threats to be preparing for, and Vader is here too, just because he outputs damage on their level. So that's what I would be thinking of in terms of the most relevant threats in our meta. Then here in tier 2, we have some mid-range strategies, and also Vel, Lando Blue, Lando Green, Talzin, and Obi are still great decks, but my question of this week is how they'll match up into the field above and adapt and prove themselves. Very notably, in player interviews this week, Benton was very emphatic that Talzin Yellow is Tobias's worst matchup due to that deck's great ground board control. So a very big deck building puzzle for me is, can you bring Talzin to a tournament without just conceding the space aggro matchups? I mean, we talked about this last week, and it was shown on stream as well during the event. Talzin just really does not like to face off against the space deck. You don't have a space present. Your utility cards don't reach up there very well. So we'll see how this strategy performs going forward. Finally, here in Tier 2, I have Vel in competition with Jin in my mind. I have the feeling in my brain that Jin is altogether the more stable and consistent decks. I mean, card draw is good, Hammerhead is a broken card, but Vel is a very, very awesome like assassin choice if Tier 1 comes to comprise of all these other credit strategies. I don't expect this to happen, so we'll have to watch how this leader performs in the coming week, but in that condition, your deck has a lot of really incredible main deck answers to other credit decks, and that could be a really big advantage that swings the matchup and gives this thing some sort of angle over a Jin Red. And last of all, in the rogue category, we don't have enough informations to give a good spread of relevant rogue, but I do think finding good Data Vault decks this week, if they exist, is a decent way to think about answering these decks that are trying to kill you on 7 with aggressive negotiations. Having the 3 extra HP buys you that turn or two that you need of stability, and it also messes with the specific math that these decks are designed to hit. So if the aggressive negotiation decks are good, seeing as the force decks in Talzin and Obi-Wan are not currently dominantly positioned, I think these kind of slower, more dirtily Data Vault decks that do struggle with the more active mid-range strategies could be a really good choice. So to wrap up our metagame section this week, we have the Phantom Menace of the week. These are decks that I'm looking out for if I'm attending an event this weekend. These are decks that I'm perhaps thinking that I need to prepare for. And this week, it's Tobias for sure, and to a lesser degree, Chewbacca. I think that these two aggressive credit-based strategies have a lot going for them. I do think these decks are really, really good. But beyond that, they are simply just new and exciting. I think that a lot of people will definitely be looking to try these out. And if I was thinking about going to an event, these would be decks that I would absolutely be prepared for. And if I'm thinking about a deck that I want to like overly respect, it would probably be these two guys. In response to these meta developments, I'm going to be looking to see how the Data Vault strategies match up into the aggressive decks this week. I'm looking at Leia and Luke and Lando and just all sorts of other junk all in DV, and just seeing if these decks are active enough to stay in the game with the fast strategies, or if they just end up falling over helplessly and end up too much behind on board and damage. And if it turns out that we can't quickly find anything good into the credit strategies, one question we have to ask ourselves is, how good are these credit decks in an environment that's now prepared for them? There are a lot of cards that answer credits in a kind of spectacular blowout fashion. In particular, Arvel Skeen. I mean, there's also another 3-drop Lieutenant Gorn. These are honestly crazy cards. Arvel Skeen in particular looked mad broken the whole weekend. This card has good stats, its effects, set up red 5, which are in its color, and is honestly, that red 5 card is one of the best cards in this current format. Arvel Skeen represents additional damage to base. He has great stats. And I mean, if this card untaps Switch at 3 HP is a little bit suspicious. He just goes on to have even more text and just threaten the same things next turn. So a lot of good things with this card. And we'll be asking ourselves this week if the credit decks still can be answered by side deck cards. And that'll be able to open up the field quite a bit. You know, we'll be back kind of in this question mark phase of like who ends up being dominant once these credit decks kind of meet their opposition now that they're out here in the open. If I had to make a guess on a meta rotation right now for the coming weeks leading up to PQs, I'd say that these ground-based, credit-based strategies will see an uptick in play just based on, again, all the factors I mentioned, new, exciting, piloted by a notable player, just all these things in combination. It would be foolish to think that more people won't play them than were last week. So all these things combined, I mean, there's the aspect of new toy syndrome on top of the decks being competent. And if this all comes to pass, more ground-based strategies and fewer space aggro decks around really invite Talzin and Obi-Wan, these force mid-range decks, into the format. In a wide metagame, these two force decks have very powerful engines, but at the cost of skimping on some of the utility cards. So if the metagame is very wide, if your deck is just going over the top of them in terms of power, that's a pretty good place to be. So if I had to guess right now, this is the rotation that I'm seeing with the information in front of us. Again, the format doesn't care what I think, but I think that it's always good to have a thesis that you're testing going forward as you receive more information week by week. So the format will continue to prove itself in the data as we go along, but this is just what I'm thinking right now. So that's all we've got this week. Next week, we'll have a bigger tournament to discuss, as well as some more concrete online data, and we'll be seeing how things shift around given our still limited understanding of the format. As always, the best place for questions is in the comments section below. And if you'd like to remain updated on developments in the metagame, as well as decklist discussions and educational content to help improve your play, please do subscribe and leave a like. I think this week we will be looking to do some sort of analysis on the Vader yellow deck. I was of the opinion that this deck was much weaker than it seemed to be this past weekend. I've played it a little bit. My hypothesis was that the rotation of all of its interaction, which honestly was the best part about the deck, in the forms of overwhelming barrage and no good to me dead, and especially the sanction your shuttle. I thought that would have limited the deck's power by quite a bit, and it has. But ultimately, I was kind of impressed by the plot cards that they're playing that gives its leader turn like a pretty strong like a board swing flip kind of thing. So we'll be taking a look at that. I was impressed by the Chancellor. I liked the Snub Fighter, and at the end of the day, the Victor Leader and the Clone Combat Squadron are still really amazing top end that comes online super early in the game that you can just be beaten down your opponent with. So we'll be taking a look at that, I believe. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I think that's in the works for now. That's all I've got this week, and with all this in mind, I'll catch you all on the next.